Hello all. We're going to discuss about the custom console reporter for Jasmine unit testing framework. So Jasmine unit testing framework it's pretty famous. I think a protractor uses it underlyingly for its testing, and one of the popular JavaScript testing frameworks. So we're not going to discuss much about that. Rather, we're just the whole focus of this particular video is to see how we can write a custom console reporter, because it's obvious that in the enterprise frameworks or in or in any other framework, customization is really important, and for that it's very much important that in and out of the framework. So this video is just an attempt at it. So we'll see how to do that. So as you can see, I have opened the code on the Visual Studio Code. So it's pretty straightforward. We have a spec folder, and we have a test spec.js that has a suite, and it has two test cases. So I kind of presume that whoever is watching this video understands the syntax and stuff like that. What is describe, what is IT. So I'm not going to discuss about that. And we have a support folder which has jasmine.json. Obviously it's a config file which is gonna make sure that you point to the right spec files and the helper files and stuff like that. So let's see how we can execute this through Node.js first, and later we shall add a custom reporter to this and see how it helps in uplifting the console reporter. So for now, let's look at how the default console reporter looks. So I'm just opening just clearing it off. All right, so I don't think we have the required node modules installed, because you can see there's no node modules folder. So first and foremost, let's install the node modules. Obviously we need Jasmine, so let's do that. For that, sudo npm install Jasmine. So I just want to install it locally. So hence the option save dev repository. Cool. So it's installed. Let's do an ls. Cool. We have our node modules. So let's switch back to Visual Studio Code and refresh your Explorer. Okay, cool. You got your node modules. So it's fine. So we have Jasmine installed as well. So just to kind of check what's the Jasmine version. Jasmine. Okay, cool. So since it is installed locally, you're gonna use npx. So probably I'll do one more video later with the difference between npm and npx and the way it looks for the modules. I know there's a lot of stuff available on the net, but doesn't harm doing one more video on that and probably learning it much better. So let's check out the version. Cool. So the Jasmine version is 3.5. So we have all the stuff ready. So let's clear this and let's run the suite. So the way we're gonna do is Jasmine, and then we're gonna give the path of the script. Cool. So I did run it, and this is the default console report which you see. Basically it's randomized with a seed. It basically runs the two tests randomly, and that's the thing you're seeing, it two specs. So what if you want to have some cool a test which probably or a cool console reporter with your own statements. So the idea of this particular video is to kind of show how to do that. So I just want to kind of emphasize on one more thing. So I'm sure like a lot of Jasmine tutorial which is available over the net mostly talks about the spec runner, which is a HTML file where you can run through the spec runner, right? So I just want to kind of highlight the fact that we can run Jasmine in three different ways. One is obviously the HTML file which it runs, and it gives you a cool HTML report through the spec runner. I'm sure none of our enterprise frameworks or enterprise necessities doesn't go that way. So the other option is through the CLI, through the Jasmine CLI, which is the one which we just did now. So where you have a Jasmine test runner, and then you just pass in the JavaScript or the specs, and then it just starts running it. So and the third option is to kind of write a JavaScript and load your required config files and load your Jasmine into that particular JavaScript, and then finally execute all your specs or the tests. I think that would be the cool way to do it, and it is also very easy to kind of register your custom reporters, whether it can be a cool HTML reporter or a console reporter. So we're going to do the third way of running the cases. So what I'll do is I'll have one test so let me probably add it here, or probably I'm gonna add it outside. Node module spec, right? So cool. So we're gonna have test pretty.js. Okay, so gonna probably move this outside. Cool. So it's directly under the Jasmine playground under the root directory. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna import the Jasmine. So I mean, if you're coming from a Java background, so obviously it's an equivalent of import. I know with the ES6 specification you can do an import. Here I'm going the older way with the Node.js, the way you do require. So I'm going to do Jasmine and then create an object. Cool. So next is load the config file, right? So loading the config file would be okay. You're gonna say load config file, then we're gonna give the config file path, which is obviously spec support and jasmine.js, and this is the standard config file, no specific changes as such or nothing special, so I'm not talking much about that. So now the config file is done. Now obviously you execute it, right? So you're gonna call jasmine.execute. Cool. So let's see how to run this. So just to remind you, so I just now told that like we have three options to run. One is a spec runner, the second option is through the Jasmine CLI, which is what we just now did, and the third option which we are just talking right now is, or which we are going to demo now, is through Jasmine as a library. So we're going to just execute that test pretty.js, through the node, and then it should still go ahead and execute, and probably you would see the same console report. So let's clear this. No. Cool. So we see the same thing. So far so good. So now let's take the option of, or the real intention of this video was to actually have a custom reporter, right, and probably have some cool messages instead of what we're seeing right now. So cool. So what we need to do is, if you go back to the Jasmine documentation, which is available on this particular URL. So basically it has some cool callback functions, which can be implemented, and then probably use your own log statements to show up on the console, and then just add this particular or register this reporter to the Jasmine global object. So we have Jasmine done, Jasmine started, spec done, spec started, suit done, and suit started. So we would probably in this thing we would just focus on spec done and spec started, which is like spec started would be called when initially the test case is getting executed, and spec done would be called when the test case is done actually. So in our case, just to refresh, we have, let's go back to our test case. Yeah, we have two test cases, spec 1 and spec 2 under a suite. So let's see how to do that. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go back and probably write custom reporter.js. Cool. So let's create reporter. Yeah. So let's create an JavaScript object with callbacks to spec started and spec done. So I already have some code. Probably in the interest of time, I'll try to copy paste that. So this one more window of the Visual Studio Code, which is my personal one. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this spec started and probably the spec done. So we're gonna have these two. Going back to this. All right, so what we'll do is we just need the description of the spec, right? Spec started. So we'll just delete this, just trying to keep it simple. And spec done would be description, or I would say probably spec result description is, yeah. Cool. So probably for now we can avoid this. Cool. So this is a very simple reporter, and then need to export this so that we can use it in our JavaScript. Cool. So going back to the test pretty. So before we execute, we are gonna register the custom reporter. So here it's a simple call. So we're gonna say add reporter and the name of it. Cool. So obviously it's not gonna work for the simple reason that we need to import that custom reporter which we just wrote, right? So the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna say var reporter acquire. So that's under spec support, right? So we're gonna say spec support. So we have a reporter, and then that's what we're gonna we are registering it here. So this should be fine. Let's see what happens if we run this. Saving it, just clearing this. Oops, there's an error. So cannot find the module. Okay, so I need to give the full. Okay, so clear this. Cool. So we are actually still seeing the default reporter. Let's see, probably we will clean up the default reporter. So okay, So get the environment, clear the reporters, yeah, and then add your custom reporter and just go ahead and do this. Cool. So there's no result as such. Let's see why. So I'm just looking at my the earlier code which I just worked on. So this seems to be fine. Add reporter, execute. So in our case, we are good. Going back. So in our case, we have done spec, support, custom reporter. We have loaded the config file. And we have actually added the reporter. We're just focusing on spec started and spec done. And then Jasmine execute. So let's go back to this and see what's going wrong here. So we have result description. Cool. Cool. So it's all started, everything is fine. So basically it started spec 1, it says goofy test and it is passed, and spec started and it says so is a spec, and so is a spec is passed. So the only thing is our spec descriptions are not the same, so it should be spec 1 and spec 2. If you just recollect, if you look at it here, it is spec 1 and it is spec 2, right? So we just need to see where is that we are getting this goofy test, and and so is a spec. So what we're gonna do right now is let's check the spec. Good, it's all the same. It shouldn't have probably picked that. So yeah, and I had one more folder or a workspace where I was working on. So I had one more spec, which goes with the same name. I'm just doing vim, yeah, and this had this goofy test and so is a spec. Exactly not sure why this particular tests are picked up, because these are completely two different folders. Either way, to be on the safer side, what I'll do is I'd go back and probably rename this to spec 1. No, because the Jasmine.json, the config file looks for JavaScript or the files with a suffix of spec. So I'll add it here, test1. Cool. So let me go back to the, so our this Jasmine playground. Cool. Cool. So we have the results here. It's spec started, which is spec 2, and spec 2 is passed, and the next spec is spec 1, and spec 1 is passed. So this is how you actually come up with your custom console reporter. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.